Security, remove this useless woman. My stepmother said that into a microphone in front of 200 guests at my father's retirement party. And my father, standing 3 steps away in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, looked at the floor and said nothing. I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. And within 47 minutes, I canceled every family-funded account, moved $17 million into a trust she didn't know existed, and turned off my phone. When I turned it back on, there were 56 missed calls, and my entire family was standing at my front door. But they weren't there to apologize. They were there because a legal document they'd never seen had just collapsed 20 years of my stepmother's careful planning. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Laura Paxton. I'm 34 years old, and this is the night I stopped being invisible. Now, let me take you back 11 months to the day I received an email from a dead woman. My father is Richard Paxton. If you've driven through the suburbs north of New York City and noticed one of those glass and steel office parks that seem to multiply every year, there's a decent chance his name is on the permits. Commercial real estate. That was his kingdom. 35 years of buying land, building things, and shaking hands with men who wore watches that cost more than most people's cars. He announced his retirement the spring I turned 34, and the whole town acted like a senator was stepping down. But that kingdom had a foundation most people never saw. My mother, Catherine Hale, died when I was 11. Ovarian cancer. 8 months of diagnosis to funeral, and then she was gone. Just like that. Like someone had blown out a candle in the middle of dinner. What I remember most isn't the hospital or the silence afterward, it's the kitchen table. My mother sitting across from me with a roll of craft paper and a set of drafting pencils teaching me how to draw a floor plan. She'd sketched the bones of a building, the load-bearing walls, the joists, the hidden geometry that held everything up. And she'd say, "See, Laura, everything beautiful starts with structure." I didn't know then that she was also an architect. Nobody told me. That detail got buried along with everything else about her. 8 months after the funeral, 8. My father married Diane Hartwell. I remember the exact morning he told me because I was sitting at that same kitchen table drawing a floor plan of our house from memory. And he sat down across from me and said, "You're going to have a new mother, sweetheart." I was 11. I didn't know how to say, "I don't want a new one." So I said nothing. That was the first time I chose silence. It would not be the last. Let me tell you about Diane. Diane Paxton, née Hartwell, was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and rearrange it without moving a single piece of furniture. She did it with tone, with timing, with the particular talent of making every suggestion sound like a kindness and every command sound like a question. She wore Chanel tweed the way other women wore denim, casually, constantly, as if it simply appeared on her body each morning. Her hair was always blown out, always honey blonde, always exactly the same. I never once saw Diane Paxton look unprepared. That should have been my first warning. Within a year of the wedding, the Thanksgiving seating chart changed. I went from sitting next to my father to sitting at the smaller table in the sunroom. Because you're so much more comfortable away from the crowd, aren't you, Laura? By year 3, the family Christmas card featured Diane, my father, and Meredith, Diane's daughter from her first marriage, born 2 years after me. I was told the photographer ran out of time before my solo shots. By year 5, my bedroom became Diane's yoga studio. My things were boxed and moved to the guest room. "You'll be leaving for college soon anyway," she said. "No point in wasting space." Diane introduced Meredith to people as our daughter. She introduced me as Richard's daughter from before. As though I were a rough draft my father had since revised. And the Cartier love bracelet on her wrist, 18-karat gold. The one my father gave her for their 10th anniversary, I later learned was paid for with money from the family trust. A trust built in part on my mother's inheritance. But I didn't know that yet. Not for a long time. I became a restoration architect. If you don't know what that means, I don't blame you. Most people don't, including my family. I restore old buildings, not the glamorous kind, not Manhattan penthouses or Hampton's beach houses. I work on the ones everyone else has forgotten. A crumbling Carnegie Library in Hudson Valley, a 19th-century firehouse in the Catskills, a schoolhouse in Beacon with a collapsed roof and 100 years of stories in its walls. I strip back the decay, find the original bones, and bring them back to life. It's painstaking. It's physical. Some days I'm covered in plaster dust and crawling through attic spaces with a flashlight between my teeth. I earn $110,000 a year, which is a perfectly good living, but in the Paxton world, where Meredith's Instagram sponsorship deal was worth $200,000 for posting photos of handbags, my career was a punchline. Last Christmas at the family dinner I was grudgingly invited to, Meredith announced her latest brand deal while Diane beamed. When the table turned to me, Diane tilted her head and said, "And Laura, have you found anything more stable yet?" As if I'd been job hunting, as if restoration were a phase, like a gap year that had lasted a decade. My father looked at his plate. He always looked at his plate. I drove home that night in my Subaru Outback, 7 years old, 200,000 miles, paid off. Meredith's Mercedes GLC was parked next to it in the driveway when I left. She'd patted my hood on the way in and said, "Cute car, very you." I didn't answer. I just drove. That's what I'd always done, drove and swallowed and drove. But what none of them knew was that 6 weeks earlier, the Historic Preservation Society had awarded me their highest honor for the Carnegie Library project. I didn't tell them. I'd stopped offering good news to people who only knew how to diminish it. That project, though, that library, would change everything. I just didn't know it yet. 11 months before the retirement party, I was kneeling on the floor of my apartment in Brooklyn Heights, sorting through a box I hadn't opened in years. It was my mother's box. A battered cardboard thing I'd carried from the Westchester house to my college dorm, to my first apartment, and finally here. A third-floor brownstone walk-up with creaky floors and good light. Inside, my mother's leather-bound notebook, a few of her drafting pencils, a photograph of her standing in front of a half-built house with sawdust in her hair, and the biggest grin I'd ever seen. And at the very bottom, beneath a stack of old birthday cards, a sealed envelope I'd never noticed before. It was cream-colored, heavy stock. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, that slanted, confident script I'd recognize anywhere, it said, "For Laura, when she's ready." My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of her personal letterhead. And this is the part that stopped my breathing. The letterhead read, "Catherine Hale, AIA, Hale Architecture and Preservation." My mother had been a licensed architect. She'd had her own firm. Nobody had ever told me. Not my father. Not Diane. Not a single person in 23 years. Below the letterhead, in that same slanted hand, "My darling girl, there are things about our family's money I need you to understand when you're old enough. I've made arrangements to protect what's yours. Mr. Aldridge has everything. Find him." Tucked behind the letter was a business card. Thomas Aldridge, Esquire, Trusts and Estates. I sat on my apartment floor for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and searched his name. Thomas Aldridge was 67 years old and still practicing. His office was in Midtown Manhattan, 12 stops on the subway from my front door. I composed an email with my full name and the words, "My mother was Catherine Hale Paxton. She left me a letter. She told me to find you." He responded in 2 hours. The subject line read, "I've been waiting for this email for 23 years, Miss Paxton. He said he had a document I needed to see. He said it could only be discussed in person. And he asked how soon I could come." I went the next morning, but before I tell you about that meeting, I need you to understand something about my father. Richard Paxton was not a villain. That's what made it so much worse. A villain you can hate cleanly. My father was something more complicated. A man who loved me, but lacked the courage to show it when it cost him anything. I have one memory I return to more than any other. I was 14. My father picked me up from school on a Tuesday. No reason. Just showed up and drove me to the west side of town where a beautiful old stone building was being demolished. We sat in the car and watched the wrecking ball swing. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your mother would have fought to save that building." It was the last time he mentioned her name. After that, Catherine Hale Paxton became a ghost in her own house. Her photographs disappeared from the hallways. Her books were boxed. Her name was replaced by Diane's in every sentence, every tradition, every toast. And my father let it happen, one erasure at a time, because Diane's tears were louder than my silence. 3 weeks before the retirement party, I called him. I wanted to meet for coffee, just the two of us. He said yes immediately, and for a half second, I felt something warm and unfamiliar. Then my phone rang 10 minutes later. Diane's voice. "Your father's schedule is very full right now, Laura. Maybe after the party." A week later, the invitation arrived. Crane and Company cardstock, gold foil lettering, Celebrating 35 Years of Excellence, Richard Paxton. Hosted by Diane Paxton and Meredith Paxton. My name was printed as Laura Paxton Hartwell. Diane's maiden name hyphenated onto mine like a brand. I decided I would go. But first, I would see Thomas Aldrich. 3 weeks out from the party, Diane began building her stage. I noticed the first move on a Monday. I'd sent a message to the family group chat, something small, asking what time we were expected at the venue, and the message sat there, delivered but unanswered for 3 days. On Thursday, I opened iMessage and realized the thread was dead. No new messages. No activity at all. I texted Meredith separately. "Is the family chat broken?" She replied 4 hours later. "Oh, Mom made a new one. Must have been a glitch." There was no glitch. There is never a glitch with Diane. I called the event coordinator at the Whitmore Hotel, a woman named Janelle who'd been handling the party logistics. I gave her my name and said I wanted to confirm my RSVP. There was a long pause. Then, "I'm sorry, I don't have a Laura Paxton on the guest list. Could you be a +1? I felt the floor shift beneath me. Not surprise. Recognition. I'd seen this pattern before. The slow mechanical precision of being disappeared. But this time, the machinery was running faster. I called Diane directly. She picked up on the second ring. She always did because Diane never wanted to seem like she was avoiding you. "Laura, what a surprise. I wasn't sure you'd come, given everything." She let the pause hang, a loaded ellipsis implying some shameful condition I should already know about. Then, "But please, don't wear one of your work outfits. This is black tie." I said I'd be there. She said she'd have someone add my name. That evening, I checked the American Express Platinum card my father had set up for me when I turned 18. A family card linked to the Trust for Emergencies. It was still active. And for the first time, I looked at the account structure and realized every card, every club membership, every insurance writer in the Paxton family was linked to the same trust, the same pool of money. And I was starting to understand whose money it actually was. 2 weeks before the party, I drove out to Westchester to give my father his retirement gift early. I wanted to see him without the noise, without the performance, just daughter and father. I'd spent 3 months restoring it. An original architectural rendering of the first commercial property my father ever purchased back in 1989. I tracked down the original blueprint from the county archive, stabilized the paper, reframed it in reclaimed walnut. It was, I thought, the kind of gift that said, "I see who you were before all of this." My father opened it in the living room. His eyes went soft. His fingers hovered over the glass. For a moment, he was somewhere else. Somewhere before Diane, before the gold foil invitations, and the Chanel tweed. "Laura," he started. Diane appeared in the doorway. She glanced at the framed rendering the way you'd glance at a child's finger painting on a refrigerator. "That's sweet, Laura, but we already have the walls full. Meredith commissioned a portrait of your father, oil on canvas by a real artist." My father set my gift down on a side table. He didn't fight for it. He never fought for anything that was mine. Diane guided him toward the kitchen. I stood alone in the living room and looked up at the fireplace. Above the mantel hung the portrait Meredith had commissioned, oil on canvas, gilt frame. It showed my father seated in a leather chair, Diane standing behind him, one hand on his shoulder, Meredith at his side, smiling. The composition was complete. There was no empty space, no room for anyone else. I was turning to leave when I heard Diane's voice from behind the kitchen door, low and fast. "She's going to make a scene at the party, Richard. You know how she is. She'll bring up her mother and ruin everything. Maybe we should prepare security." My father's reply was barely audible. "She's my daughter, Diane." And Diane's response was perfectly clear. "Exactly, and daughters should know their place." I left through the front door. But as I passed Diane's study, I saw it. On her desk, a manila folder with the logo of a law firm I didn't recognize and the words "Trust Amendment Draft" printed across the tab. I didn't stop, I didn't open it, but I saw it, and I remembered. Meredith called me the following Saturday, not to catch up. Meredith never called to catch up, but because she needed a second opinion on her outfit for the party. I said yes, because I was still, at 34 years old, saying yes to people who never asked how I was doing. We met at Bergdorf Goodman, 5th Avenue. 8th floor. The kind of place where the air itself smells expensive, and the saleswomen remember your name if you spend enough. They remembered Meredith's. She tried on 7 dresses in 90 minutes, an Oscar de la Renta in ivory silk, a Valentino in deep red, a beaded Marchesa that cost more than my monthly rent. Each one was brought out on a velvet hanger by an associate named Claire, who called her Miss Paxton and treated her like minor royalty. The total hovered somewhere above $12,000. Meredith didn't blink. She handed over a black card, linked like everything to the family trust, and Claire whisked it away with a smile. When I stepped to the counter to pay for a pair of shoes, simple black, $200 from my own account, Claire looked at my card, then at me and said, "And you are?" Meredith laughed. Not cruelly, exactly. Worse. Absently, like the answer was obvious. "She's my half-sister. She restores old buildings like physically, with her hands." The way she said it, with her hands. As if labor were a quaint little hobby. As if the blisters and the plaster dust and the 100-year-old beams I'd saved from collapse were somehow less real than a $12,000 dress charged to someone else's money. On the drive home, Meredith delivered the message I'd been waiting for. "Laura, Mom thinks you shouldn't give a speech at the party. It's better if you just attend. You know Dad doesn't like being emotional in public." I didn't answer. I just drove. That's what I'd always done. Drove, and swallowed, and drove. Meredith's Jimmy Choo bags rustled softly in the back seat. My single Nordstrom rack bag sat on the floor, tucked between my feet at a red light, like something trying not to take up too much space. 1 week before the party, I had lunch with a woman named Ellen Marsh. Ellen had been my mother's closest friend, one of the few people in my life who still said Catherine's name out loud, naturally, as if she were a real person and not a footnote. We met at a French bistro on the Upper East Side, the same one my mother used to take me to for Sunday brunch when I was small. White tablecloths, copper pots on the wall, a waiter who still remembered that Catherine ordered the croque madame every time. I ordered the same. Ellen was quieter than usual. She kept rearranging her silverware. Finally, halfway through her second glass of Sancerre, she said it. "Laura, is it true you were let go from your job?" I put down my fork. "Who told you that?" "Diane, at the garden club luncheon last week. She said you've been struggling. No stable income, relying on your father," she said. Ellen paused, clearly uncomfortable. "She said you have some mental health difficulties, that you push everyone away, that the family's been trying to help, but you won't accept it. She called you, and I'm sorry to say this, the frigid daughter." I sat very still. I had not been fired. I had never relied on my father for a single dollar since the day I left for college, and my mental health, while certainly tested by 23 years of Diane Paxton, was not a topic I had ever discussed with anyone in that garden club. Diane was building a story. She was seeding it into every circle that mattered. The garden club, the charity boards, the country club wives, so that when the retirement party came, everyone would already believe the narrative. Laura Paxton is unstable, uninvited, and unwelcome. That way, when she was removed from the party, no one would question it. They'd nod and whisper, "Poor thing, it was only a matter of time." Ellen reached across the table and took my hand. "I didn't believe her, Laura. Your mother was the strongest woman I knew, and you are her daughter." I squeezed Ellen's hand, and something inside me that had been bending for a very long time finally stopped bending and started straightening. The night before the party, I sat alone in my apartment. It was quiet in the way Brooklyn gets late on a Friday. Distant sirens, a dog barking 3 buildings over, the low hum of the radiator that had needed fixing since November. I sat in the Eames chair I'd found at an estate sale and spent 4 weekends restoring, a cup of chamomile cooling on the side table, and I looked at the photograph of my mother on the wall, Catherine Hale, 31, standing on a construction site with sawdust on her boots and a rolled blueprint under her arm, laughing at something off camera. Alive. I thought about not going. I could stay here, in my apartment, in my quiet, in my carefully built life, and let them have their party, and their portrait, and their narrative. I could swallow this one too. I was good at swallowing. But then I looked at her letter, pinned to the corkboard above my desk. Find him. I had found him. I knew the truth now. About the trust, about the $17 million, about the provisions my mother had written into law before the cancer took her. I had the documents, I had the authority, I had Thomas Aldridge standing by. I hadn't used any of it, because I wanted to give my father one more chance. If Richard Paxton stood next to me at that party, If he introduced me to his colleagues, if he said my name the way a father should, I would put the documents back in the drawer and never speak of them. I was offering him the easiest test in the world. Choose your daughter, just once. I laid out my dress. Midnight navy, clean lines, impeccable tailoring. Nothing flashy. Nothing that begged for attention. I opened my jewelry box and took out my mother's Mikimoto pearl earrings, the only thing of hers Diane hadn't managed to claim. I held them in my palm and felt their weight. Cool, smooth, impossibly steady. Then I picked up my phone and called Thomas Aldridge. "If I need you tomorrow," I said. "Can you execute within the hour?" His voice was calm, precise, unhurried. "Everything has been ready for 23 years, Ms. Paxton." I set my alarm for 7 o'clock. I hung the dress on the back of my door. And I slept. Deeply, clearly, the way you sleep when you finally stopped hoping and started deciding. The Whitmore Hotel on a Saturday evening in October is the kind of place that makes you feel underdressed even if you're wearing your best. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, Italian marble floors polished to a mirror sheen, waitstaff in black tie carrying silver trays of champagne that caught the light like liquid gold. The grand ballroom had been transformed. Round tables draped in white Belgian linen, centerpieces of white hydrangeas and pale gold roses, a live jazz quartet in the corner playing Cole Porter with the kind of effortless precision money buys. 200 guests, business partners, golf friends, Westchester socialites, people whose last names appeared on hospital wings and university endowments, milled and murmured and clinked glasses beneath a banner that read, "Cheers to Richard Paxton, 35 years of building legacy." I gave my name at the reception table. The young woman checked her list, scrolled, checked again. Her smile faltered. "Paxton, Laura. I'm sorry I don't see— Oh, wait, here." She pointed with her pen. "You were added yesterday. Yesterday. 200 guests confirmed months in advance. And I was added yesterday." Squeezed into the margin like a typo someone had caught at the last minute. "Thank you," I said, and I walked in. It hit me in waves, the whispers. Not shouts, not accusations, whispers. The kind that travel across a cocktail hour like a draft under a door, a cluster of women near the bar, champagne in hand, glancing my way. "That's the frigid daughter," a man in a pinstripe suit leaning toward his wife. "I heard she's been out of work for months." Another voice half hidden behind a hydrangea arrangement. "She can't do anything right. Diane says she just shows up and causes scenes." Diane's seeds were blooming exactly on schedule. I kept my back straight. I kept walking. I scanned the room for my father and found him near the small stage at the far end of the ballroom, standing between Diane and Meredith, smiling for a photographer who was arranging them into a family portrait. Richard, Diane, Meredith. 3 people, perfectly composed, perfectly lit. The photographer snapped his frames. No one looked for me. No one called my name. And from the corner of my eye, I noticed 2 men in dark suits positioned near the ballroom entrance. Security, earpieces. One of them glanced at Diane, then at me, and shifted his weight. They were watching me. They'd been told to watch me. I made my way across the ballroom. It's a strange thing walking through a crowd that's been primed to see you as a problem. Every smile felt like a flinch. Every turned shoulder felt deliberate. I passed a table of my father's former business partners, men I'd known since childhood, and not one of them said hello. Diane's narrative had done its work. I wasn't Richard Paxton's eldest daughter anymore. I was the cautionary tale they'd been briefed on. I reached the small circle around my father. Richard saw me first. His face did something complicated. A flicker of warmth quickly followed by something that looked like panic. He opened his mouth. But before the words came, Diane's hand was on his shoulder, her fingers pressing into the fabric of his tuxedo like a leash pulled taut. "Laura," he managed. "Glad you could make it." 5 words. The same 5 words you'd say to a colleague you barely recognized. Diane turned to face me. She was radiant. Cream silk gown, hair swept up, diamonds at her throat. That particular smile she wore when she was about to draw blood. Her voice was pitched just loud enough for the circle of 15 people around us to hear every syllable. "Laura, what a surprise. I wasn't sure you'd come given everything." She let the pause land, her eyes sweeping the group as if inviting them to fill in the blank with whatever rumor they'd already been fed. Then, softer, almost tender. "Well, just don't make it about yourself, okay? Tonight is about family." "Family!" The word landed like a slap. Meredith appeared at Diane's elbow fresh from somewhere. A new Tiffany necklace at her collarbone, $8,000 of platinum and diamonds catching the chandelier light. She looked at my dress with the specific kind of smile that is actually in inventory. Laura. Love the dress. Is that from last season? I let it pass. I had not come for Meredith. I looked at my father. Dad, can I talk to you for a moment? Alone? Richard's eyes moved toward me. I saw it, the instinct, the flicker of yes. His body leaned half an inch in my direction. Then Diane's hand tightened on his arm. Richard, the Hendersons are waiting. You can talk to Laura later. Her voice was silk over steel. My father straightened, looked at Diane, looked at me, and then he turned and walked toward the Hendersons, Diane guiding him like a rudder. I stood alone in the middle of 200 people. An older woman I didn't recognize walked past, paused, and said to her companion, not quietly enough, poor thing. Diane told me she's been struggling. Such a shame. Her mother was wonderful. Her mother was wonderful. Yes, she was. And she left me more than anyone in this room understood. I need to take you back now. 3 weeks before that party, to a Tuesday afternoon in Midtown Manhattan. Thomas Aldridge's office was on the 14th floor of a pre-war building on Madison Avenue. The elevator was slow, the hallway was dim, and the door was solid oak with a brass nameplate that hadn't been updated since the 90s. Inside, it looked exactly the way you'd imagine a trust attorney's office would look if he'd been practicing for 40 years and saw no reason to redecorate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather-bound volumes of estate law, a mahogany desk buried underneath stacked files, and on the wall behind his chair, a framed photograph of my mother. Younger than I'd ever seen her, standing in front of a building with a hard hat and a grin. Aldridge was 67, silver-haired, deliberate. He spoke the way careful lawyers speak. Every sentence weighed before it was released. Your mother retained me in 2003, he said, when she first learned about the cancer. She wanted to ensure that her assets, specifically the inheritance she brought into the marriage from the Hale family, would be protected for you. He placed a document on the desk between us. 40 pages, leather-bound, my mother's signature in blue ink on the final page, the trust agreement of 2004. He explained it to me in plain English because my mother had asked him to 23 years in advance. Catherine Hale had entered the marriage with $17 million in inherited family wealth. That money was placed into the Paxton Family Trust, but with a critical legal distinction, it was designated as segregated funds, walled off, legally separate from the rest of the trust's assets, even though it sat in the same account. Your mother signed an amendment in 2006, Aldridge continued, sliding a second document forward. 6 months before she passed, it designated you, Laura Catherine Paxton, as the Snort's sole beneficiary of the segregated funds, effective up on your 30th birthday. No co-signatures required, no trustee approval needed. I stared at the page, my mother's handwriting in the margin, for my girl. Does my father know about this? I asked. Aldridge paused. The kind of pause that tells you the answer before the words arrive. Your father was present when the original trust was established. He has always known. The air left the room. And Diane? Mrs. Paxton, the current Mrs. Paxton Russell, was never informed. The trust agreement was never shared with her. She appears to believe the entire $42 million in the trust belongs to the family generally. He folded his hands. She's been contacting my firm and the fiduciary manager, a woman named Rebecca Stone, requesting access to the trust provisions. Ms. Stone correctly declined. $17 million. Dollars. My mother had built a wall around it with paper and ink and foresight, and it had held for 23 years. What happens, I said slowly, if I withdraw? The remaining $25 million won't cover the loans your stepmother authorized using the full $42 million as collateral. The bank will issue a margin call. I sat with that for a long time. I'm not going to sign today, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. Give me until after the party. I want to see if my father chooses me. Aldrich looked at the photograph of my mother on the wall, then back at me. Your mother, he said, would understand. I left his office with a copy of both documents in a folder and something I hadn't carried in years. A choice. Now you know what I knew when I stood in that ballroom. Let me tell you what happened next. The speeches began at 8:30. Diane took the microphone first. Of course she did. She stood on the small stage in her cream silk diamonds blazing under the spotlights and delivered a speech that was by any measure flawless. She thanked the guests, praised Richard's 35 years of work, called Meredith up to the stage for an embrace that drew a collective awe from 200 throats. She spoke about family, about loyalty, about the people who truly make a house a home. She did not say my name. She did not look at me. Catherine's name was not mentioned once. When the applause faded, I stood up. I wasn't going to make a speech. I just wanted to walk to the front, hand my father his gift. A small velvet box containing a brass compass I'd painstakingly restored. The same one my mother had given him when they were young and in love, engraved with her initials CH. And say something quiet, something private, something that was ours. I was 10 steps from the stage when Diane saw me coming. Her expression didn't change. That's the thing I remember most. How controlled she was. She leaned into the microphone and in a voice as clear and calm as a dinner bell, she said, "Security." The ballroom murmured, heads turned, then she said it. Every word precise, every syllable designed to carry. "Please remove this woman. She wasn't invited and she's causing a disruption." 200 people went silent. The jazz quartet stopped. Even the bartender paused mid-pour. Every pair of eyes in that room swiveled to me, standing alone in the center aisle, holding a small velvet box, wearing my mother's pearls. I looked at my father. Richard Paxton was 3 steps from the microphone, 3 steps from his wife, 3 steps from his daughter. He looked at Diane. He looked at me. And then he looked down at the floor. He said nothing. The 2 security guards materialized on either side of me. The one on my left spoke quietly. "Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you out." The room watched. Some looked away, some didn't. Meredith near the stage had her phone up. Filming? I realized. Filming her sister being removed from their father's retirement party. I set the velvet box on the nearest table. I did not throw it. I did not slam it. I placed it gently, the way you'd set down something you loved and were leaving behind. Then I looked at my father one last time and said, not loudly, not with anger, just clearly enough for the people nearby to hear, "I came for you, Dad, not for her, but I see your choice." I turned. I walked toward the exit, back straight, eyes dry. My mother's Mikimoto pearls catching the last of the chandelier light as I passed through the double doors and into the lobby. Behind me, I heard Diane's voice return to the microphone. "I'm so sorry about that, everyone. Now where were we?" The jazz quartet started up again before the doors closed behind me. The October air hit me like cold water. I stood on the front steps of the Whitmore Hotel, marble steps, smooth and pale under the street lamps, and listened to the muffled music bleeding through the walls behind me. Cole Porter, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses, a world continuing without interruption, as if a woman hadn't just been marched out of her own father's celebration by 2 men in earpieces. I sat down on the top step. The stone was cold through the fabric of my dress. I could see my breath in the air. Inside, the ballroom glowed warm and golden through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the light was blue-white and thin, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. I looked at my reflection in my phone screen, my mother's pearl earrings, my own face, composed, steady. But underneath it, something cracking along a fault line that had been there since I was 11 years old. I gave myself 60 seconds. 60 seconds to feel it. All of it. The humiliation. The silence where my father's voice should have been. The knowledge that 200 people had watched me be erased and then gone back to their champagne. 60 seconds for every swallowed word, every Christmas at the small table, every time I'd driven home and told myself it didn't matter. Then I stood up. Because my mother didn't raise me to sit on other people's steps, I pulled out my phone and called Rebecca Stone. She picked up on the first ring. I'd warned her this call might come tonight. "Rebecca, this is Laura Paxton. I'm ready to proceed with the segregated fund transfer tonight." Her voice was steady, professional, and surprised. "I'll need your digital signature and the authorization code for Mr. Aldridge. I can execute within 45 minutes of receiving both. You'll have them in 10. I hung up. The ballroom music swelled behind the glass doors. I didn't look back. I learned what happened inside the ballroom afterward from Ellen Marsh, who stayed through the end and remembered everything. Diane returned to the microphone as if nothing had occurred. She smoothed her speech the way she smoothed everything, with a light hand and an iron will. "Family is about loyalty," she told the room, her voice warm and certain. "And tonight, we celebrate a man who built everything from nothing. From nothing. As if $17 million of Catherine Hale's inheritance were nothing. As if the foundation beneath the foundation didn't exist." The room applauded. The champagne flowed. Meredith posted her Instagram story from the stage, a close-up of her and Diane, cheek to cheek, with the caption, "Family first." No mention of the sister who'd been escorted out 5 minutes earlier. Ellen told me that a few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats after I left. A woman at table 6 leaned toward her husband and whispered, "That didn't feel right." A retired judge named Harold Forster set down his champagne flute and didn't pick it up again. But no one spoke. No one stood. That's the thing about rooms full of polite people. Politeness is just another word for complicity when someone's being dragged out in front of you. Richard sat at the head table. He didn't eat. He didn't speak during the toast his business partner offered. Ellen said he kept looking at the velvet box I'd left behind, sitting on a table near the aisle, untouched, like a small monument to something broken. He didn't open it. Diane leaned over to a man Ellen recognized as one of Richard's real estate partners and said, quietly, but not quietly enough, "Laura has always been difficult. Catherine spoiled her, but we've tried our best." The narrative held, the room believed, the party continued. And while they danced and drank and told themselves everything was fine, I was sitting in my car in the hotel parking lot about to press a button that would change all of it. My laptop was already in the car. I'd brought it that evening the way a surgeon brings a scalpel, hoping not to use it, prepared if she had to. I opened it on the passenger seat. The screen lit the interior of my Subaru in pale blue light while the parking lot of the Whitmore Hotel stretched dark and quiet around me. Inside the building, 200 people were dancing. Out here, it was just me and a Wi-Fi hotspot and 23 years of silence finally reaching their limit. I dialed a conference call. Thomas Aldridge picked up first, then Rebecca Stone. "Authorization code," Aldridge said. He read it off. 12 alphanumeric characters, calm and precise, as if he were reading a weather report. "This authorizes the transfer of segregated funds from the Paxton Family Trust to the Laura Paxton Irrevocable Trust per the Trust Agreement of 2004 and Amendment of 2006. Rebecca confirmed receipt. "Ms. Paxton, I'll need your digital signature on the DocuSign document I'm sending now." My phone buzzed. I opened the email. Read every line, because my mother taught me that everything beautiful starts with structure, and signed. "Processing," Rebecca said. "Estimated completion, 45 minutes. While I waited, I did the rest. 3 American Express Platinum cards. Diane and Meredith were authorized users on accounts linked to the Trust's collateral covenant. Country club membership. Supplemental insurance riders. All of it tethered to the same pool of funds that was about to shrink by $17 million. When the trust balance dropped below the covenant threshold, the bank's automated system would freeze every linked account. I wasn't canceling anything out of spite. I was watching arithmetic do what arithmetic does. At 9:47 p.m., Rebecca called back. "Transfer complete, $17,042,316.78. The funds are in your trust, Miss Paxton." I closed my laptop. I sat in the dark for a moment and listened to my own breathing. Then I turned off my phone, started the engine, and drove home to Brooklyn. When I turned my phone back on 40 minutes later, there were 12 missed calls. By the time I set it on my kitchen counter, the number was 29. By the time I finished making tea, it was 56. 56 calls. They hadn't called me 56 times in the last 23 years combined. Here's what 56 calls sound like from the other end. At 9:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the transfer cleared, Meredith tried to buy a round of drinks for her friends at the ballroom bar. Her Amex was declined. She laughed, embarrassed, and pulled out a second card. Declined. A third. Declined. The bartender's smile went stiff. Meredith's cheeks went red. At 9:58 p.m., Diane's phone buzzed with a notification from the fiduciary firm. The kind of notification that arrives in bold type with the word urgent in the subject line. Action required. Significant asset movement in Paxton Family Trust. Please contact your account manager immediately. Diane stepped away from the dance floor. She called Rebecca Stone directly. Rebecca, professional, neutral, bound by fiduciary protocols, said, "A beneficiary has exercised their right to withdraw segregated funds under the original trust agreement. I'm not authorized to disclose further details by phone." Ellen told me later that she watched the color drain from Diana's face in real time. It was like watching a screen go dark. First the smile, then the composure, then the certainty, all of it, gone in the space of a single phone call. Diane walked straight to Richard, gripped his arm, and pulled him to a quiet corner near the coat check. "What did you do?" she hissed. Richard stared at her. What are you talking about? Diane pulled up the trust portal on her phone. Her fingers were shaking. The account balance, which that morning had read $42 million, now displayed $24,957,683.22. And in the transaction log, one line, segregated fund withdrawal. Beneficiary, Laura C. Paxton. Richard's face went gray. Diane's champagne flute was still in her hand. She hadn't set it down since the speech. Her fingers were trembling around the stem, and for the first time in 23 years, the woman who controlled every room she entered looked like she'd lost the floor beneath her feet. She caught herself, lowered her voice. She can't do this. Richard, call her. Now. He called. I didn't answer. He called again, and again, and again. I was already home by the time the calls started stacking. My apartment in Brooklyn Heights is a third-floor walk-up in a brownstone built in 1891. Original moldings, warped hardwood floors, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people and a kettle. I chose it because the ceilings are 10 feet high and the windows face east, and every morning the light comes through like it's been filtered through honey. I restored the built-in bookshelves myself, floor to ceiling, white oak, and filled them with architecture books and novels, and a few things that don't have a category but felt right. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and let it vibrate. The messages came in waves. Meredith first, frantic. Laura, what did you do? Then Diane, no longer velvet, no longer measured. You have no right. This is family money. Then Meredith again. My cards aren't working. Laura, this isn't funny. Then Richard, the simplest and the one that hurt the most. Laura, please call me. We need to talk. Then Diane, sharp as broken glass. I'm calling our lawyer. You'll regret this. I watched the screen light up and go dark. Light up and go dark. Like a heartbeat monitor for a family in cardiac arrest. I didn't answer. Instead, I ran a bath. I took off the midnight navy dress and hung it carefully on the back of the bathroom door. I unclipped my mother's pearl earrings and set them on the vanity. I stepped into the hot water and I stayed there until my breathing slowed and the steam softened the edges of everything. When I got out, I put on a sweater and made chamomile tea and sat in my Eames chair and looked at the photograph of my mother on the wall. Catherine Hale laughing on a construction site, covered in sawdust, completely alive. I did what you asked, Mom, I said to the empty room. I found him, and I found what you left for me. The phone had stopped ringing. 56 calls total. I checked the time, 11:08 p.m. Then the intercom buzzed. I looked at the intercom screen. There they were, all 3 of them standing on the stoop of my brownstone at 11:15 on a Saturday night in October. Richard in his tuxedo, tie loosened, face the color of wet concrete. Diane still in her cream silk gown, mascara tracked down both cheeks in dark rivulets, clutching her Hermes bag like a lifebuoy. And Meredith, half a step behind, hugging her phone to her chest with both hands, eyes swollen and red. For 23 years I had gone to them, to their house, their dinners, their parties, their terms. I had driven to Westchester and sat at the small table and smiled through comments that were designed to shrink me. I had rung their doorbell like a guest in my own family. Now they were at mine. I didn't move right away. I stood at the intercom and let myself look, really look, at the image on that screen. Diane Paxton, who had never once visited my apartment in 7 years, was standing on my stoop with mascara on her face and panic in her posture. There was something in that image I needed to absorb before I opened the door. I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out the folder. The copies of the trust agreement and amendment, the transfer confirmation from Rebecca Stone, and one more document, something I hadn't mentioned to anyone yet, something I'd been carrying since my meeting with Aldridge. I tucked it at the back of the folder. I checked my reflection in the hall mirror. Cashmere sweater, hair down, no makeup, clean, simple, mine. I pressed the intercom button. Come up. I unlocked the front door and opened it before they reached the landing. Diane was first up the stairs, heels clicking on the old wood, already drawing breath for whatever she'd been rehearsing in the car. She crossed my threshold and started, "How dare you!" I raised one hand, not dramatically, just enough. "You are at my door, Diane. Lower your voice or leave." She stopped, mid-word, mid-breath. It was, I think, the first time in 23 years that anyone had said no to Diane Paxton on a doorstep. She looked at me as if I'd spoken a language she didn't know I understood. I stepped aside. "Come in," But I'll be the one talking tonight. They sat in my living room the way people sit in a doctor's office when the news is already bad. Richard took the armchair by the window, the one I'd reupholstered in olive linen last spring. He looked shrunken inside his tuxedo, a man built for conference rooms now compressed into a Brooklyn apartment that smelled like chamomile and old books. Diane stood. She refused to sit. Standing was control, and she wasn't ready to give that up. Meredith perched on the edge of the sofa, arms crossed, phone clutched in one hand, not looking at anyone. Diane fired first. You stole from this family. That money belongs to your father. I opened the folder on my coffee table. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I'd spent my career uncovering the original structures of buildings, finding the load-bearing walls beneath decades of bad renovations, and that's exactly what I was going to do now. That money, I said, $17 million, never belonged to my father. I slid the trust agreement across the table. 40 pages, leather-bound, my mother's signature in blue ink. It belonged to my mother, Catherine Hale Paxton, your predecessor. The room contracted. Diane's eyes locked on the document like it was a weapon pointed at her chest. The trust agreement of 2004, I continued, drafted by Thomas Aldridge, executed by my mother before her diagnosis progressed. It designates $17 million, her family inheritance, from the Hale estate as segregated funds within the Paxton Family Trust, legally separate, walled off, mine. Diane's voice came out thin. That's a fake. Richard, tell her. She turned to my father. Richard was staring at the document on the table. He didn't look up. He didn't deny it. The silence in the room was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. You knew, I said, not a question. Didn't you, Dad? My father's throat moved. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. When he spoke, his voice had the cracked quality of something that had been sealed shut for a very long time. Your mother, she set it up before she got sick. I should have told you. Diane turned to Richard as if she'd been struck. You knew? He said nothing. But his silence was its own confession. 23 years of it, finally audible. I placed the second document on the table. Amendment of 2006, signed by my mother 6 months before she died. It names me, Laura Catherine Paxton, as sole beneficiary of the segregated funds, effective on my 30th birthday. No co-signature, no trustee approval. I'm 34. I exercised my legal right tonight. I sat back. The documents lay between us on the coffee table, between my cup of chamomile tea and Diane's trembling hands. I didn't steal anything, Diane. I reclaimed what was always mine. The documents are right here. You're welcome to read them. Diane read fast. I watched her eyes scan the pages, flipping, searching, looking for the crack, the loophole, the mistake. She didn't find one. My mother had been meticulous. Aldridge had been meticulous. 23 years of legal architecture built to hold. When Diane looked up, she'd shifted tactics. The fury was gone, replaced by something I'd seen 100 times. The quiver in the chin, the careful widening of the eyes, the trembling hand pressed to her collarbone. Victim mode, her most practiced performance. Richard, she breathed, turning to my father. She's tearing this family apart. After everything I've done for this family, for her. I cut her off. Not with volume, with information. Speaking of what you've done, Diane, I know about the trust amendment you've been drafting. The performance collapsed. It was instantaneous. Like watching a mask crack down the center. Her hand dropped from her collarbone. Her mouth opened, then closed. The room went vacuum silent. 3 weeks ago, I said, I was at the house. I saw the folder on your desk. A draft amendment from a law firm designed to remove me as beneficiary of the segregated funds and transfer them to Meredith. Meredith's head snapped up. What? I also confirmed with the fiduciary firm that you've been calling them repeatedly requesting access to my mother's trust provisions. Details that Rebecca Stone correctly refused to share with you because you have no legal standing to receive them. Diane abandoned the tears. What replaced them was something raw, genuine anger stripped of all the silk. So what? That money's been sitting there for 20 years doing nothing. Meredith deserves it more than you. At least she contributes to this family. Mom, stop! Meredith's voice was small but sharp, a crack in a wall I hadn't expected. Diane didn't hear her, or chose not to. I looked at my sister, then back at Diane. Meredith deserves what, exactly? $17 million that my mother earned? Snorts. That my mother's parents built over 3 generations? For what? Instagram sponsorships charged to a trust that isn't hers? Richard's voice surfaced, weak. Laura, that's enough. I turned to him. I'd been waiting for this. The thing he always said. Enough. His favorite word. The word he used every time the truth got too close to comfort. No, Dad. You don't get to say enough tonight. You lost that right when you watched 2 security guards walk me out of a ballroom and said nothing. The silence after that was different from the others. It wasn't the silence of composure or control. It was the silence of a man hearing for the first time the cost of his own cowardice. Diane's hand moved to her Hermes bag. She pulled out the manila folder, the same one I'd glimpsed on her desk, and held it up like a shield. This amendment is perfectly legal, and Richard was going to sign it. He can't, I said. The segregated funds are already in my name. They have been since 2006. That amendment was drafted to alter something Diane had no authority over, for assets she had no claim to, using a provision that doesn't exist. Your lawyer should have told you that. Unless you give them the full picture. Diane stared at me. The folder trembled in her hand, a weapon that had turned to paper. I let the silence hold for a moment. Then I explained what was going to happen. Not with emotion, not with satisfaction, but the way I'd explain load calculations on a restoration project. Facts, structure, arithmetic. When I withdraw the $17 million tonight, the trust balance dropped from $42 million to $25. But over the past several years, Diane, using her position as a co-trustee, authorized loans against the trust's full value. Real estate leverage. The total outstanding debt collateralized by the trust is approximately $38 million. Richard's head lifted slowly. He hadn't known the number. I could see it on his face. The specific expression of a man who'd signed things without reading them because his wife told him it was handled. The bank's loan covenant requires the trust to maintain collateral coverage at a minimum of 1-to-1. As of 9:47 tonight, the coverage ratio is roughly 66%, $13 million short. The bank's automated compliance system has already frozen the linked accounts, credit cards, the country club membership, the supplemental insurance riders. A formal margin call will follow within 72 hours, Meredith whispered. That's why my cards— Yes. Diane's voice was a blade. You planned this. You planned this to destroy us. I looked at her across my coffee table, across the trust documents, across the cold tea, across 23 years. No, I said. I planned to come to my father's party, give him a compass that belonged to my mother and hope for one evening to feel like his daughter. You planned a public humiliation. You planned to have me removed by security. You planned a fraudulent amendment to take my inheritance. I simply stopped waiting for you to do the right thing. Then I reached into the folder and pulled out the last document. The one I'd been carrying since my meeting with Aldridge. The one I hadn't shown anyone. It was an email, printed on plain paper, sent 6 months earlier from Diane's personal account to her attorney, and accidentally CC'd to Thomas Aldridge, whose email address was still on file as the trustee of record in the firm system. I read it out loud, every word. We need to move quickly before Laura finds out about Catherine's trust provisions. Richard doesn't have the spine to stop us. The room went airless. Richard reached for the printout. He read it once, then again. Then he set it down on the table and looked at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. Not the woman in cream silk who organized his life and managed his schedule and told him when to smile. But the woman who had written Richard doesn't have the spine in a sentence designed to steal his dead wife's money from his living daughter. Diane, he said. His voice was barely audible. Is this real? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her face answered for her. The specific, unmistakable expression of someone caught not in a lie, but in the truth. That's not revenge, I said quietly. That's arithmetic. And that I nodded at the email on the table is who she is. What happened next was the sound of a structure failing, not all at once, not the dramatic collapse you see in movies, the slow kind, the kind I've seen in my work 100 times. When a building has been standing on a compromised foundation for decades, and one day a single beam gives way and everything above it shifts. Diane reached for the email printout as if taking it off the table could undo the words. Richard pulled it back. She pivoted. And there it was again. The chin quiver. The glistening eyes. The hand at the throat. She's manipulating you, Richard, just like Catherine always did. My father stood up. In 23 years, I had never seen Richard Paxton stand up against Diane. He'd yielded. He'd deferred. He'd looked at his plate and let silence do the work of agreement. But something in that sentence, just like Catherine, hit a wall inside him that even he didn't know was still standing. "Don't," he said. His voice was shaking, but the words were stone. "Say her name." Diane stopped. Her mouth was open. No sound came out. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, she had no response prepared because she had never imagined she'd need one. Meredith stood slowly from the sofa. Her face was blotchy and wet, but her voice was steadier than either of her parents. "Laura," she said, "I didn't know about the trust, the amendment, any of it. I looked at my sister, my half-sister, the golden child, the one who'd been handed everything I'd been denied, and I saw, beneath the Tiffany necklace and the tear-streaked makeup, a 26-year-old woman standing in the wreckage of the only story she'd ever been told about her family. I believe you didn't know about the trust, Meredith, but you knew what it felt like to watch your sister get erased from family photos. You knew what it meant when I sat at the small table every Thanksgiving. You knew, and you said nothing." She closed her eyes, nodded once. My father took a step toward me. "Laura, I'm sorry." I let the words settle. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't say it's okay because it wasn't okay. It hadn't been okay for 23 years, and pretending otherwise would be one more form of silence. "I know you are, Dad, but sorry isn't enough anymore. I need you to do something." He waited. I laid it out clearly, simply, the way my mother would have. 4 conditions. First, the $17 million stays in my trust. That is not negotiable. Second, Diane's draft amendment is destroyed, completely. Notarized confirmation that it's been voided. Third, you retain your own attorney, not Diane's attorney, yours. Someone who will explain your actual financial position without anyone editing the numbers. Fourth, I am willing to rebuild a relationship with you, but it will be on equal terms, with clear boundaries, and it will not go through Diane. I paused. Those aren't punishments, Dad. They're the minimum conditions for me to trust you again. Richard looked at the trust documents on the table, at the email printout, at the compass box he hadn't yet seen, the one I'd left behind at the party. Then he looked at me. "Okay," he said quietly, without negotiation. Diane grabbed her bag. "This isn't over, Laura." I met her eyes. "For me, it is. What happens next is between you and your choices." She left, heels clicking down my staircase. The front door closed hard enough to rattle the glass. Meredith lingered a moment longer. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find it. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Laura," and followed her mother down the stairs. My father stayed. He sat back down in the olive chair and stared at his hands, and neither of us spoke for a very long time. The radiator hummed. The brownstone settled. The photograph of my mother watched us from the wall. The fallout arrived in waves over the next 72 hours, each one more precise than the last. Monday morning, 9 a.m. The margin call came. A letter from the bank sent via courier to Richard's home office. Bold letterhead, red urgent stamp, the kind of document that makes your hands cold before you finish the first paragraph. The Paxton Family Trust was $13 million below the required collateral threshold. Richard had 60 days to either inject additional capital or liquidate assets. 2 commercial properties, an office complex in White Plains, and a retail center in Stamford would need to be sold. Richard hired his own attorney that same afternoon, not Diane's lawyer, his own. A woman named Patricia Holt from a mid-sized firm in Manhattan, recommended by a colleague Diane had never met. Patricia pulled the full financial records of the trust, something no one had done independently in over a decade. What she found was the second detonation. Over the past 15 years, Diane had authorized approximately $2.3 million in withdrawals from the trust's operating account, categorized in the records as family expenses. Patricia's audit revealed they were anything but. Personal shopping, first-class travel, spa retreats, Meredith's lifestyle costs, a down payment on a vacation property in the Berkshires that was titled solely in Diane's name. None of it had been approved by the trustee of record. None of it had been disclosed to Richard. All of it constituted a breach of fiduciary duty under the trust's governing documents. Diane was given a choice: repay the $2.3 million through a structured plan or face civil liability and potential removal as co-trustee. The country club membership remained frozen. The insurance riders lapsed. Meredith's credit card stayed dark. And 2 days after the margin call, Meredith Paxton quietly deactivated her Instagram account. No announcement, no farewell post, just a single story that read, taking some time offline. It was the first honest thing she'd posted in years. 1 week after the party, my father called. Not through Diane, not through a secretary or a scheduling intermediary. He picked up the phone himself and dialed my number and asked if I'd have coffee with him. We met at the French bistro on the Upper East Side, the one with the white tablecloths and the copper pots, the one my mother had loved. He was already seated when I arrived. He looked older, not in the gradual way that aging usually works, but in the sudden way, as if a decade had landed on him in 7 days. His shirt collar was loose, his eyes were shadowed, he had not shaved well. On the table in front of him was the velvet box. I opened it, he said. The brass compass lay in his palm. I'd spent weeks restoring it, cleaning the patina, repairing the hinge, polishing the case until the engraved initials were legible again. C.H. Catherine Hale. My mother had given it to him in their second year of dating, when he'd told her he wanted to build things, and she told him he needed to know which direction he was facing first. My father turned the compass over in his hands. The needle still worked, trembling, settling, pointing true. She was my compass, he said. Your mother, and I let someone else steer. He was crying, quietly, the way men of his generation cry. Jaw tight, eyes spilling, no sound. I hadn't seen him cry since the funeral. 23 years ago. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But I said, I'm glad you're here, Dad. That's a start. He told me he'd asked Diane to move out of the house temporarily. Not a divorce, not yet, but a separation. She was staying at a hotel in Scarsdale. He needed space, he said, to understand what had happened to his life while he wasn't paying attention. We ordered coffee. Then, without planning it, we both ordered the croque madame. My mother's standing order, every Sunday at this same table. Neither of us mentioned it. We didn't need to. 2 weeks after the party, Diane came to my door alone. No mascara this time, no silk gown. She wore a gray cashmere coat over a simple black dress, and her face was bare. No foundation, no careful concealer work, just the raw map of a 58-year-old woman who hadn't been sleeping. The Cartier love bracelet was gone from her wrist. I learned later she'd sold it to begin repaying the $2.3 million. She didn't buzz the intercom. She must have followed someone through the front door. I opened my apartment door and found her standing on my landing, arms at her sides, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. You've ruined everything I built, she said. It wasn't angry. It wasn't performed. It was the flattest, most honest thing Diane Paxton had ever said to me. I leaned against my doorframe. You built on someone else's foundation, Diane. My mother's money, my mother's husband, even my mother's daughter. You tried to erase me so you could keep the stage to yourself. She flinched. Not the theatrical flinch, the real one, the kind that happens in the muscles around the eyes before the brain can edit it. And then she said something I didn't expect. I was terrified, Laura. Every single day for 23 years I was terrified that one day you'd show up and take it all away. Her voice cracked. And you did. I looked at her. I understood the fear. Understood it the way you understand the rot inside a wall you've opened up. It doesn't excuse the damage, but you can see where it started. I didn't take anything that was yours, I said. I took what was mine. The difference is, you never understood there was a difference. She held my gaze for a long moment. No apology came. I didn't expect one. Diane Paxton was many things, but she was not a woman who apologized. Not to me. Not to anyone she'd placed beneath her in the architecture of her life. She turned and walked down the stairs. I listened to her footsteps, slower than I'd ever heard them. No click of designer heels this time, just the quiet pad of flat shoes on old wood. I closed the door, leaned my forehead against it, breathed. 3 months later, I stood on a stage again. But this time, no one asked security to remove me. The National Trust for Historic Preservation held its annual gala in Washington, D.C. A black tie event in a restored Beaux-Arts ballroom, ironwork and vaulted ceilings, and the kind of craftsmanship that makes you believe people once built things to last. I was there as a guest of honor, invited to present the inaugural project of the Catherine Hale Foundation, a nonprofit I'd established using a portion of the trust funds to restore endangered historic buildings in underserved communities. My first project, a community center in a formerly redline neighborhood in Baltimore. Built in 1912, abandoned in 1987, condemned in 2014. We were bringing it back. Load-bearing walls, original tile, the whole skeleton, saved. I wore an emerald green dress that night. Simple, Well cut. My mother's Mikimoto pearl earrings. Behind me on the screen, in letters 6 feet tall, the Catherine Hale Foundation, preserving what matters. My father was in the audience, front row. He'd driven down from Westchester alone. No Diane beside him, no entourage, just Richard Paxton in a navy suit, sitting upright, watching his daughter speak. I talked about buildings, about the ones everyone walks past without seeing, about the ones that get condemned because it's easier to tear something down than to do the hard, slow, unglamorous work of finding out what's still good underneath. I talked about my mother, an architect I never knew was an architect, who built things that held for decades because she understood that everything beautiful starts with structure. When I finished, the room stood. My father stood first. Afterward, he found me near the coat check. He was holding something. A flat, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. I opened it and went still. It was the architectural rendering I'd given him at the retirement party. The original blueprint of his first building. The one I'd restored from the county archive. He'd had it framed in dark walnut, museum-quality glass, archival matting, the whole treatment. "It's been on my wall since the day you gave it to me," he said. "I just never told Diane." I held the frame against my chest and looked at my father, this flawed, frightened, trying man, and I didn't say it's okay. I said, "Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know." We walked out together into the cool DC night. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address on the front, but I recognized the stationery. Meredith. 3 pages, front and back. In careful handwriting. An apology. Not the performative kind. Not the kind that explains itself away. But the raw, stumbling, honest kind that a 26-year-old writes when she's seeing her life clearly for the first time. I haven't replied yet. But the letter sits on my desk, next to my mother's letter, next to the compass box. Some things take time. Some buildings can't be restored in a season. But the foundation, the real one, the one beneath everything, is sound. So, that's my story. I didn't win because I screamed louder. I didn't win because I had more money, or more power, or more cruelty than the people who tried to erase me. I won because 23 years ago, while she was dying, my mother sat down with a lawyer and a pen and a stack of legal paper and built something that would hold. She didn't do it with drama. She didn't do it with anger. She did it with structure. The same way she built everything. I used to think strength meant enduring, showing up to every dinner. Sitting at the small table, driving home in silence, swallowing whatever was served and calling it family. I thought if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, someone would eventually see me. No one was going to see me. Not because I was invisible, but because the people around me had decided that my invisibility was convenient, and the only person who could change that was the one standing in the mirror. If you're listening to this and you recognize something, the whispers. The exclusion, the way your name gets misspelled on purpose, the way your accomplishments get met with silence while someone else's get a standing ovation, I want you to know you're not crazy, you're not too sensitive, you're not the difficult one, and you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. My mother left me a letter. It said, "Find him." And what I found wasn't just a lawyer or a trust document or $17 million. I found the thing she'd really been protecting all along, my right to take up space. Thank you, Mom, for the letter, for Mr. Aldridge, for the pearls, for teaching me that some buildings are worth saving, including the one I live in. Before you go, if this story reminded you of someone you love, or someone you need to set a boundary with, share it with them. Not as a weapon, but as a mirror. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, tell me in the comments. Tell me which one you chose. I read every single one. There are more stories like mine in the description below. If you're still here, if you stayed through all of it, you're exactly the kind of person who needs to hear them. Thank you for listening.